We are happy to welcome Sosamma Samuel-Burnett, the visionary founder of Global Justice, to TALTalks. With over 3 decades of dedication to human rights advocacy and policy, Sosamma stands as an exemplar of unwavering commitment to justice. Under her leadership, Global Justice equips students and professionals with a profound understanding of geopolitics and its intimate connection to justice issues. Their mission to inform, impact, and inspire generations reflects a vision for a more just and interconnected world. By bridging the gap between various sectors and educational institutions, Global Justice fosters collaboration to address global injustices effectively. Sosamma's expertise and tireless advocacy inspire meaningful change and empower the next generation to lead the charge for justice. Join us at TALTalks to listen to Sosamma Samuel-Burnett's remarkable journey and the transformative impact of global justice. Together, we can envision a world where justice knows no bounds.
Thank you so much to Tej and to the team here at TALTalks for this wonderful opportunity to share. I am a justice and human rights advocate, and for as long as I can remember, that is what I've been and that is what I've done. But I want you to know that what I do and what I am doesn't just evolve around myself. It has been part of a trajectory, a journey that is generational. So my story really starts with the story of my father. I have an interesting place in space that I come from. I'm from a wonderful, incredible country called India. India is a subcontinent, as many of you know, the largest democracy in the world. And it's a place of tremendous diversity and injustice. But that is the place that I was born. And I was born in a small village in the southernmost tip of India. And that place and my space, and the faith and the generational journey that I shared is what brings me here today. My pursuit of justice began with my father. My father is pictured here. I'm 54 years old, and when my father was only 54, he passed away from this world. But he left a tremendous impact in his 54 years. He was a man of great vision. He was a man who loved to dream. When he was growing up in the 1940s, he had a dream of coming to America, a place that he thought was the most remarkable place in the world. But in the 1940s, in a small village in India, people thought that was just impossible to go to America. That would be like going to the moon. But in 1969, the year I was born, America put a man on the moon. And my father was inspired. And 2 years later, he went to America, his moon landing. And that became the start of me, as a small child, understanding that the impossible is possible. If you dream it, if you believe it, and if you put in the work to make it possible. But my commitment to human rights really comes from my commitments that I saw from the women in my life. My grandmothers and my mother in particular. My grandmothers, both of them have remarkable stories, but the one that you see on the screen is my namesake. She was married at age 11. She had her first children at age 12 and 13. She went on to have 7 children. She never had an education. She never had anything except a commitment and a dedication to her children and their children and their children. She prayed and supported and encouraged so that every generation could have the opportunities that she herself never had. My mother was 17 when she was married, and she, at 18, had me. And a couple of years later, when my father pursued his dream, she followed him from that little village all the way across to New York City, never having traveled outside that village. And that became the start of my life here. My mother's commitment to me, taking all the risks, being courageous in making that trip, and building into us every step of the way. And that's what I knew was going to be my call, that I needed to be that committed, that dedicated to bringing human rights to people, to giving them opportunities if I can take the courage to do something for them. But why do you pursue human rights and justice, you might ask? Well, let's consider our world. The world right now has a whole bunch of statistics that are very difficult to process. We have at least 196 countries in the world. We have, believe it or not, 80% of the world living in some form of poverty. We have 27 or more actual armed conflicts, and if you see the news today, you know there's been a few more. The reality is those are more conflicts than we've ever had in this world before. We have 89.3 million people that are forcibly displaced around the globe. We have 32.5 million refugees, and we have nearly 50 million people that are slaves. That is more than the height of the slavery, the African slavery movement we saw before. Currently, there are about 213 million businesses around the world. And then on top of it, we have an incredible number that has never existed before. We have nearly 8 billion people living on this planet, the largest number to ever live on this planet. But with all those overwhelming numbers, what I want to tell you is the most significant number is the number 1. Because it only takes one person to make a change. It only takes one person to have an impact. But once we sort of see this sort of context that we have in the world, we have to also ask ourselves, okay, we need to pursue justice, but what is justice? Justice is a difficult concept, and I can't tell you that today, despite being a lifelong advocate for justice, that I can give you a definition, because the definitions can vary. But I want to share a couple of references that might be useful. The first is sort of a dictionary version, right? Moral rightness and fairness based on principles of ethics, rationality, law, natural law, religion or faith, equity. We understand these concepts, whether it's just innate in us or perhaps we studied it. But there's another reference that comes from biblical reference, and that's Micah 6:8, which says, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. I really resonate with that definition of justice because justice became a verb. It was no longer a concept, it's an action. And look at the next step, the loving mercy. You know, in this world, justice isn't just about making sure that someone comes to justice in a sort of courtroom sense. It's about everyone receiving justice. Because sometimes, oftentimes, the perpetrators were also victims of injustice. So we need to think about that merciful concept. And finally, the humility. No one has it all. And we need everyone and everyone's understanding of justice to be able to pursue it. So pursuing justice has many elements, and these are just a few elements that I want to make sure we all understand. It requires a relationship with others. So when I say I'm a justice advocate, it's not one person on a stage, it's all of us in this room, and everyone outside of this room, and in the community and in the world we live in. It includes everyone. There are those of you that might be experts in the tech arena, others that might be educators, perhaps health professionals. Whatever is your background and your calling, you are also a justice advocate. I'm a human rights lawyer, that's my calling. But there's nothing that requires everyone to go into law and policy. That's a good thing. We need a range of expertise. It also involves an interconnection of principles. Justice isn't a singular thing. There's political justice, economic justice, social justice, and all of those are interconnected principles that we need to consider. Justice is really about a holistic approach to having people realize the fullness of their human rights. Justice also connects emotion and action. It is heart and mind, hands and feet. It's not just something we study, it's something we do. It's not just something that we do alone, it's something we do with others, that we interact with. And that is also very important for us to understand. Justice also compels us to have a global perspective. It's great when we can work in our own communities, and we should. But what happens on a local community here could also be happening in a local community elsewhere. And we need to connect that, because we're all just a couple of steps away from being that organization, that community, or that country that is struggling. And so we need to recognize their struggle is ours, and vice versa. And finally, it necessitates that we are always learning and teaching. We have to be teachers and students in all contexts, whether it's in our families, in our work life, or in our communities. So I always like to think of this as climbing mountains. We're in Colorado, right? And this is a great, easy place for us to understand this concept of climbing mountains. But let me challenge us a little bit. No one that I know of has ever just showed up at Long's Peak and started to climb. It doesn't work that way. The very first step of climbing a mountain is learning about that mountain. Learning when is the appropriate time to go. Learning the details that you need to do to get yourself prepared. So the very first step of being a justice advocate and pursuing justice and human rights is to be informed. Many people have a heart for justice and they long to just jump right in. I would caution that, because the very first thing we do to climb a mountain is learn. Secondly, we pursue justice by making an impact. So as soon as you learn that information, you need to share that information. You need to let other people know, I'm about to climb that mountain. I'd like to do this thing. You need to collect people who will cheer you on, who support you, encourage you, and you would do the same for them. Making an impact is not just doing what you're doing, but it's really helping others understand that and engage in that and support them. And finally, climbing mountains is hard. Pursuing justice and human rights is also. You cannot do it without recognizing that there is going to be challenge and difficulty and conflict and obstacles. You must persevere. But to persevere, you also have to have an understanding. You may not always be the person who gets to the summit. I've been a human rights advocate my whole life, and what I'm going to tell you is I may not solve the human rights dilemmas of the world myself or in my lifetime. In fact, I brought my two daughters here so that we can recognize who might, right? It's always going to be generational. So when you're climbing mountains, you don't only reach up to get to where you need to go, but you reach back to get the next person to join you. Persevering. So in these contexts of climbing mountains, think about being informed, being impactful, and inspiring others. So I want to tell you what I've done with this message. As much as I share this with all of you, this is all principles and concepts that I had to learn, that I had to absorb, and that I had to live out. And what happened to me was an interesting journey myself. I had served in different contexts as a human rights advocate. And then I had an opportunity when my family was in California to suddenly become an educator and work to help the next generation as a public policy professional. That work was inspired by an interesting thing, 9/11. My husband was in the military, and the day after he finished training in a very unique airframe, the U-2, 9/11 happened. And at that context, I realized, this was before I had children, that I needed to start thinking about those children that I had not yet had. And I needed to think about their children. And I needed to figure out how to invest. And so I spent 10 years as a full-time faculty member dedicated to that. And along the way, my children also came. But then, a turn of events, my husband started to fly for Southwest Airlines. And it took him in a different direction, and ultimately landed us in Denver. And when I got here, a very interesting thing happened. My husband was very ill, and we didn't know that. But what we discovered is that he had a serious illness that required treatment. So for a year, we spent that time doing that. And what I want to tell you is during that time, this human rights advocate, this justice advocate, became an advocate for him. And that climbing mountains was different, but equally significant. And in that year, as we were climbing that mountain, I started to realize that as he was improving, I also had to continue my journey. And I said a prayer and said, okay, now what? I've been an advocate, I've been an educator, now what? And the answer that came is, now you become a resource. You use all that information and experiences that you had around the world. You use that experience you had in training up students, and now you apply it to everyone. To individuals, to organizations, to businesses, to other institutions, and you allow everyone to gain to become justice advocates. And the result was global justice. Global Justice vision is to inform, impact, and inspire the generations to learn, lead, and do justice together. And the most important piece of that is together. Our mission, as you'll note, our name is an acronym, is to extend geopolitical learning opportunities for students and professionals to pursue justice ethically, creatively, and collaboratively. The last three words are extremely important: ethically, creatively, and collaboratively. We need those concepts in our society because those are the concepts that will get us closer to achieving justice. Our purpose, as we've mentioned, is to be a resource to really help everyone pursue their call for global justice, which might be different from person to person, group to group, community to community. And we have a couple of approaches that are important. We bring together faith-based communities and secular communities. We don't think that denominational perspectives should divide us from pursuing justice together. We work across sectors, so we mentioned business and health, but also advocacy and arts. The creative community can bring so much to our justice pursuits. And we work across generations. We have a wide range of generations represented here, and that's exactly what every pursuit of justice should look like. And finally, we want to be nonpartisan. You'll notice geopolitical is in our name. This is what we do, but that's different than partisanship. It doesn't matter if we're left, right, or center. We can work on justice together. We have a wide variety of programs and projects, and some of them are highlighted here, but I want to specifically mention to you our global market. When you pursue justice, it's not just about helping someone. It is really about equipping someone so they can help themselves, their families, and their communities. And one of the ways we do that is through the global market. This beautiful kimono I'm wearing today was made by a young woman who was rescued from sex trafficking in Cambodia. And when she was rescued, she needed more than just the rescue. She needed a future. And by learning a skill, she has that opportunity to take care of herself and her family. The necklace I'm wearing today is made by an orphan with disabilities who was thrown away in Central Asia, but when rescued and given this skill, is able to take care of themselves. The jewelry that I'm wearing otherwise is made by a villager in Uganda who comes as a refugee trying to find a way to take care of her family. Each of these programs that you see on the board are just different examples of how we can have that same kind of impact, politically, socially, economically. Pursuing justice with us has lots of different shades. We would love people to come join what we do in different ways. Some of you with your talents, some of you with your treasure, some of you with your time, maybe all of you with a little bit of all. But our hope is that you learn, that you join us in leading, and that you help us do this justice by living out these principles and teaching others in your circles, within your influence, to also do the same. We have contact information, and we reach out to lots of different people through our website, through email, through our social media platforms, and we welcome every single one of you to join all of them, and to encourage others to join as well. And finally, because we have spent some time this morning talking about change, I want to share a quote that most of you probably know from someone that most of you probably know. "Be the change you wish to see in the world" is by Mohandas Gandhi. He is a tremendous leader, as we all know. He was considered the leader of the millennia, the man of the millennia, they named him. And he's from the country that I came from. And he was also from a small little place and made a huge impact in our world. But what I want to challenge all of us today is that phrase is often seen on bumper stickers and t-shirts. And that's good. But what's better is that that phrase is imprinted in our hearts, in our minds, in our hands, and our feet. Because when we learn, lead, and do justice, that is when we can be the change that we wish to see in this world. Thank you.